Stalin, you'd actually have a really good economy. It's a shame those two didn't. The later why it's legitimate, my actual point. Why? Why it's legitimate to kill people under certain circumstances? It's actually quite important. It's essentially liberalism. What we say is in certain circumstances when your rights are fundamental, when you are basically a slave, it is legitimate to rebel against a master, right? We say that we would all say that in a system of slavery, it would be legitimate to kill your master to release yourself from slavery. Now, we also know that the fact that that person doesn't necessarily have agency doesn't necessarily matter. The fact that the capitalist doesn't necessarily choose to exploit you doesn't necessarily matter. As we all know, if you were attacked, for example, by a zombie, it would still be legitimate. Now, here's my second point. Why capitalism inherently is slavery? What we say is under capitalism, basically, the starting position is fundamentally undemocratic, it's fundamentally unequal, right? You come to the marketplace, supposed democracy of the marketplace, from an unequal position, right? You have supposed equal bourgeois, like, political freedom to sell your own labour and stuff like that. But you don't have an equal control of the means of production. That means to meaningfully participate within that system, make decisions within that system, like live in the way which that system demands such that you would have a reasonable life. You have to sell your own labour. You aren't meaningfully given any kind of choice. Now, this is firstly important in the sense of all the sort of liberal argument we got from the opposition about choice and stuff, because what we say is this isn't any kind of meaningful choice. But also what we say is even if we weren't caring about choice, this is simply a bad life to live, because it's fundamentally a life of economic misery, a life where you don't have any kind of meaningful control of your own life, of your own economic position. Ladies and gentlemen, what have I told you today? I've told you that in a system of slavery, it is legitimate for you to kill that master. Capitalism is that slavery, and the only way to kill that master is through violent revolution. Because, ladies and gentlemen, true democratic decisions can only be made when there is good information. And good information only comes when you challenge those systems through violence. Otherwise, people won't realise that the systems are exploitative. I beg you to propose.
I call upon Susan to continue the case of opposition.
Oh, I get it now. You're very clever. Okay, so, sorry, am I alone in thinking that is really strange? Wait, so, in order for you to ever have meaningful choice, which is like apparently what Will sees as the utmost goal ever, you have to constantly be in a state of violent upheaval. Possible structural reality you could be in, apart from this like apparently lovely post-violent revolution, non-capitalist, non-people producing anything or ever expending any labour ever to survive system is apparently where you get total choice. Bollocks, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to make an extension that will win us this debate. It's about the validity of moral claims and how they don't have any on their side. First, it's going to be split into firstly how you have to be able to reasonably foresee, although it's not a boring point, it's actually very interesting. Secondly, in terms of moral authority, and thirdly, in terms of the inconsistency of action they get on their subjects. Firstly, some rebuttal as if it was necessary. Will says, knowledge is a function of your position in relation to power. And that this object that he talks about, this sort of this reality that's out there that we can all sort of see, purely function in terms of your relation to power. Well, firstly, we don't see how we can draw out a moral claim from that. Like, if that's all that knowledge is, it's purely a function of your relations in terms of power, then we say that each person's relations to power would inherently trade off. Secondly, if he was to draw out a moral conclusion from that, that would be a rather naturalistic, fallacious moral conclusion. It would simply say that my own interpretation of my epistemic position leads me to the conclusion that this is the case. However, what Jack and I think Natalie are positing is that there is a universalised moral position where we should all be able at the end of this debate to recognise that their side has won, that there's a moral position which is acceptable to take. Absolute nonsense. Where I'm from, they might even call that naive. Secondly, he says, when I'm a slave, it's legitimate to attack. Like, it's just an assertion, like no analysis. Then he says, I'm moving on to my second way. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Thirdly, he says, in capitalism, you're inherently in an unequal position. We say, if that's the case, and you can never make the choice within capitalism, then the only way that you can make a choice is through this kind of, the choice to go and choose to violently sort of rise up. We don't see how that's like any kind of beneficial moral choice. We don't see how he's demonstrated that would be better, unless he thinks that purely moral legitimacy is just the die that we use to cast against the ethereal, and nothing which takes into account the constitutive attachments of reality. We're going to put that to you on our side of the house. Firstly, the validity of moral claims. We say firstly in terms of the fact that you have to be able to reasonably foresee when you take this action. We say that you can never know the extent of your actions as an individual choosing the moral position that your actions in terms of violent revolution are justified. These guys say, well, it's fine, because afterwards people are more likely to engage with the state. We say no. What history has ultimately told us, and this is why they give no examples of revolution, like these like magical, like fairyland revolutions that I'd honestly love to be a part of on their side of the house. In all revolutions, what you get is because of the necessary vanguard structure which it takes for individuals to collectively build up the strength to be able to revolt, you get a very paranoid government. Why? Because firstly, they're necessarily utopian. Because of the fact that they've had to convince all these people that this goal is worth killing other people. So that imbibes in them a necessary vision of utopia which they think it's hard for them to go against. Secondly, we say, in terms of certainty and uncertainty of death, they have a burden to show you why the sort of like uncertainty of death, or just like general sort of like, like we're in an economically deprived position, legitimise them specifically in taking the lives of other people. We've never had that conflict resolved. Secondly, moral authority. We say that you're acting necessarily as a revolutionary on behalf of people around you. We say that violent revolutions have to be led by a vanguard. It's not as though people can just magically rise up all together simultaneously. All of us in this room couldn't come to the exact same moral conclusion that we all have to necessarily act. It has to be led by people. This is a necessary part of reality, and they have to take it into their moral calculus. What does this mean? It means that moral justifications have to be consistent with the processes they entail. We say this necessarily will become coercive. Why? Because in revolutions of an oppressed people, it creates a political microclimate within the discourse of the vanguard in relation to their fellow oppressed people, which is coercive. Why is this? It's because they're forced to comply. Because if they're not complying, then they're essentially counter-revolutionaries. But more than that, they're people who are betraying their own people. That means that essentially we say these people often have no choice of whether or not to comply. The reason why in revolutions historically, but the vanguard leaders of revolutions have commissioned people like poets and musicians to say songs proclaiming that if you're not part of the revolution and you're not defending the men behind the wire, then essentially what you're doing is betraying your own people. It's because of the fact that people wouldn't be motivated to make that kind of moral calculus otherwise, because it's inherently irrational to think that my actions are just de facto justified on the basis that I am in an economically worse position. No, this is bad, because the thing is that when you coerce other people around you to do this, so you create a political microclimate which is coercive, the bad thing is that the consequences of your